share how you are benefiting from these sessions and how your world is expanding as we continue to co-create. So I really very much appreciate that you're joining me live. It gives me so much courage to show up in this space every month. All right, so let's dive in. This is our trauma-informed comprehensive coaching competency framework, but you notice that I'm not necessarily just directly discussing competency by competency. Rather, I would like to give you an understanding about how trauma change our life in a way that it informs love. Often, I think we are uncomfortable or sometimes even a little bit fearful with the word trauma. But you notice that in this space, as we the look at trauma from different perspectives and recognizing how trauma truly informs love. And as you shared with me your feedback during the last session, I noticed that many of you mentioned that you would like to continue to learn about the trauma evolution model. So I decided rather than being in a race of trying to cover a lot of grounds, let's really focus on what is most important to you because I'm really truly here to serve you. And I know that some of you are using this knowledge for your own development, and some of you are also practitioners in this space. Some of you are psychotherapists, professional coaches, healers. Therefore, I know that you also bring what you learn here into your life as well as your practice. Therefore, I'm very excited to discuss this model because it's always good to address a little bit. I think it provides us the bigger picture. We really look at the bigger picture. In fact, this session today will help us truly look at what it is, what it means to how it means that trauma informs love. That's really the discussion today. So as usual, I would like to invite you to recognize that if you are a sensitive person, we will be discussing uh, experiences of adversities, trauma, mental health conditions with caution. And continuing on, like I mentioned, we will look at the trauma evolution model. I look at as a researcher and also someone who is still continuing both research and academic, continue my education with psychotherapy and also trauma. I noticed that when we look at several models that are out there, they cover a lot of grounds, but at the same time, we do not have a comprehensive model to understand all the way from where trauma is originated and all the way to how it transforms us. Not just only the possibility of recovering or healing, but also more towards post-traumatic growth, and then beyond that, also our transpersonal growth as well. I think many of us find solace, comfort, groundedness in following a specific spiritual path. This can be religious, or it can be a specific faith, or you may have your own words. I think I would like to use these words very carefully. The reason being, they are labels, and what we mean by our inner world, our fulfillment, groundedness is deeply personal. So let's not be deviated by these words. Rather, let's really think about deeper humanness. What are we doing on this beautiful blue planet, which can be at times extremely loving, extremely pleasurable, and on the other side, on the other hand, sometimes extremely hostile, extremely painful. If you look at the state of the world today, I think this discussion is needed more than ever. I just wish that we all can influence all the world leaders and help them understand the reason why many of us are showing up in the world with so much pain, and then how we end up making pain and contributing to the pain in the world. I think we have so much resources on this blue planet, and that we have not really gotten together to learn from each other and learn through our experiences, learn through science, learn through deeper spiritual experiences, and come together, support each other, and create a world that is peaceful, that is healing, and more importantly for children. And what breaks my heart most is the children. The vicious cycles are continuing on. So this is an effort to share this. I have a very small audience, and I believe that you have your audience. Even if you don't, share this message further in ways that you understand. I always believe that it's not the responsibility of the world leaders to change the world. I think we all, each individual needs to take our responsibility in our smallness, in within our capacity to create that change that we envision to see. There's nothing new. What I'm saying is nothing new, but this is my contribution to how I envision to see a healed, a peaceful world, which I strongly believe that we can create. There are resources on earth, there is science, there are so many possibilities, and there are so many individuals like you, practitioners, people, those who have their heart in the right place, those who want to do this work. So I invite all of you to continue to spread the word. And if you have friends who might be interested, if you may have family members whom you think that this knowledge will be valuable, I warmly invite them as well, right? So if you can bring more people who might resonate with this message, right? So with that, let's dive in. So let's do a quick recap so that way we all align ourselves. Many of you are professional coaches, and then we have this misunderstanding, misconception that we call that we do holistic or integrative coaching. We can't really do that within a traditional coaching framework because traditional coaching frameworks focus on present to the future. While there may be few things from the past may show up, we do not have the freedom uh, from a professional standpoint to really address clients' past. When we don't address clients' past, we are not doing anything integrative. We are not doing anything holistic at all. So that's the reason why I thought, as one of my postgraduate programs, creating a thesis and really deeply learning about trauma-informed coaching, and that's how this competency framework came to be. As you notice, I'm not necessarily walking you through each competency. It takes a lot of time. It requires a very specific education journey, and then afterwards receiving supervision before you are able to go out there. Like I always say, the 12 series, the 12 lectures I'm doing are not necessarily going to make you a trauma-informed coach, but it's going to make you trauma aware. More than for your clients, I believe it's going to be valuable for you to begin that within yourself and see yourself in what I'm sharing here and see it for yourself, whether it makes sense or not, right? So let's continue on. So when we are able to be trauma informed, when we are able to recognize our clients, ourselves past, that's when we are really able to connect the dots and really be able to provide to a certain extent somewhat holistic, somewhat integrative coaching. But I still believe that it requires a larger container. Even having just the past incorporation doesn't necessarily mean it's fully holistic either. So I think it's also very important aligning ourselves with strong ethical guidelines. When we promise to people that we do such and such, we need to ask ourselves that question, are we really doing that? Sometimes we are unaware, and that's why it's important that we share this space and learn from each other and honor this beautiful practice that we hold. And if you are a therapist, you see that some of the knowledge that I'm sharing here tend to be quite basic if you're already trauma informed, but at the same time, this is focused on coaches, where coaching at the moment, traditional coaching frameworks do not have incorporation of the past and the aspects of trauma and adversities. That's the reason, but I still strongly believe that I bring this framework in a different perspective than what we see, especially in the clinical world. While it's very much aligned with the clinical world, I would like to expand further to areas where sometimes, as clinicians, we don't have the right space or the right ability to expand because of the specific frameworks that we need to work within. And I believe those frameworks are absolutely very important. That's our professional integrity. At the same time, there is no harm for us to expand further and ask questions and see beyond. And I think that's what science is about, really inviting ourselves to ask questions. And that's why I always say, even the things that I'm sharing here, I'm not so convinced in any way. What I'm sharing with you here is what I understand at the moment. When I look back 2 years ago, when I look back 5 years ago, what I knew at the time, I thought I knew, but every year, every month, I learned that I really don't know everything. Therefore, ask questions, learn more, and make this framework yours, make these insights yours in a way that resonates most with you. I think when we are limiting ourselves to we know everything and my opinion is accurate, I think we really operate in a very small container that is not expansive. So I like to be educated. If I'm sharing facts that might be wrong, you might have a better understanding. I invite you to send them to me because I really would like to continue to learn and I would like to learn from you. All right, so continuing on, we learn about trauma. So today, since we are going to look at the trauma evolution model, it's very important that we relook at everything we have done. I actually looked at the slides, the past three sites, this being the fourth session. I thought that we have covered lots of grounds in a short period of time. So today I'm going to slow down a little bit and relook at everything that we have done in a way that we can integrate. I think integration is very important. Our academic systems and our world is somewhat information driven, knowledge driven in a way that we sometimes, as human beings, we just follow rules. I think the entire world, unfortunately, majority of us are like that. We just follow rules. We do what we have been told to do. And that's mostly because that we are conditioned. Now you know what conditioning means. Earlier, if you remember in our previous session, we looked at a clay man, and we noticed that if it went around 100 people's hands, the clay man will come back in a different form. And that's what has happened to us. Now, the thing is, the clay man, we just found it on the table or we created it ourselves. If you apply to yourself, the clay man was created before you were created because you inherited your ancestral DNA. You inherited their experience, how they loved, how they cried, how they experienced fear, how they experienced anxiety, how they celebrated. All that was already created for you. So the clay man, like in the back of your ancestral line, the clay man was already created before you showed up. And the feedback that you provided for the previous session, many of you said that you really resonated with that little analogy. So we will relook at that very quickly today. So how the clayman was created, right? It's when things happen too much, too fast, and too soon, it has the potential to overwhelm us, especially our nervous system. And this is a type of adversity, type of trauma that we call overwhelming trauma. And then on the other hand side, not enough for too long. As a child, when you didn't receive care for over a long period of time, or when you did not receive the right mental, emotional care, physiological care, the right type of, like for an example, many of you are aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So there are many different levels of needs, if you recall them. The psychological need, the security needs, the love and belonging needs, self-esteem needs, and then on top of it, the self-actualization needs. Now, in order for the self-actualization to take place, it's really very important that we are able to receive those other needs. Like very often when we grew up in a family environment, we um, we may have grown up in an environment or culturally that I have heard some people saying that criticism is our love language. People say that or in a way speaking to someone in a condescending way, sometimes borderline bullying is our love language. And I think it's so unfortunate. I understand cultural context. We might not be able to change things overnight, but that is a uh, type of trauma. For an example, very often I come across people, some of my clients, they never see their self-worth. They are really struggling to see the self-worth. Even among the sometimes new psychologists And then some of the professional coaches, we very often find it's very hard for them to charge money, work with actual clients. And very often we think we kind of hide behind and we say, oh, I came here to help people. And sometimes you also end up saying things like, oh, I don't know how to do marketing. I don't know how to do business development. I don't have an actual physical office. Marketing is expensive. My course didn't teach me that. A lot of this kind of things. I think sometimes, in some cases, this is a little bit of a mask that we use. Maybe the underneath, the real problem is that we are not feeling confident enough to go out there, and putting ourselves out there can be too overwhelming for us. Now, this overwhelm could be created because as a child, we may never have received the right type of self-esteem needs. Maybe you had all the food, maybe you had more than enough food, maybe you felt very safe and secure growing up in your environment. Perhaps you may not have received the love and belonging in such a way that the nervous system understood. When we say that criticism is how we is our love language, that perhaps that's a cognitive understanding that requires a lot of understanding to process and realize that, oh, my mom is condescending, my father uh, has um, not the most kindest words when they talk to us. Perhaps it required a lot of time for us to grow, become an adult, and then to understand that actually that came out of love. But as a child, you did not understand that. You do not have a wide understanding of culture. Come to think of it, you have a very little understanding of your sense of self. So, as a child, you may not have felt really comforted, really held, really loved, really a gentle voice where you were provided with that needs, those needs. So very often, pretty much every client who comes to me says that I don't have trauma. Some clients come to me because that they have trauma, but apart from that, many clients also are looking at development. They very often say that I don't have trauma, I had the best child, I was provided with everything. And when we go into the deeper layers, we are starting to recognize, well, I had everything, but there were certain things that were not enough. And it was not enough for too long. We are not talking about toys, we are not talking about food, we are not talking about electricity. Well, many of us didn't have enough food. We didn't have electricity. Like my mom told me recently that I used to study under the post lamp sometimes. I used to study under um, oil lamp or a kerosene lamp. Well, maybe my life was too disadvantaged, but many of you had all those comforts in your life. And later on, we look back and we realize that sometimes it was not just about the food or the electricity. It's really about how your mom spoke to you, how your mom hugged you, how your dad hugged you, or how your siblings interacted with each other. So this is an opportunity. As much as you can bring this to your practice, this is not the main reason why I'm just talking about this. The main reason I'm talking about you is that if you haven't received that gentle voice, you can be that gentle voice. You can be that gentle voice to your children, and you can create that gentle voice in your community. If you live in a community where the communication is harsh, everyone is looking down upon each other because that's the culture. Well, culture is something that we can transform. Culture is something that we can change. Tradition is something that we can be aware of. And it starts with one family sometimes, and it starts with one teacher. Sometimes it starts with one coach. And sometimes, if you're working for a organization, a government, if you're a policymaker, you have that ability. There's a bigger picture to why we do this. So we call them deprivation trauma. So it's not always about overwhelming difficult experiences. They are also about how we interact with each other, how sometimes we do not understand that nervous system. Although our intention has love, the nervous system understands intention not really well unless the intention was communicated in the right, loving, caring way. It is so sad to see how many men are broken. Very often, right now, we have a trans movement, we have a feminine movement, which are very important. We still have a LGBTQA movement in many parts of the world, but in some parts, like in Thailand, for an example, we are very lucky. The LGBT movement is no longer necessary. The LGBT people are very well accepted. Trans people are very well accepted, but that's not the case around the world. So what I'm really trying to bring your attention to is that very often there are marginalized communities. And then also when we talk about racism, very often, like someone like me, of someone of color, we it's almost that we could easily say that, oh, I have lots of disadvantages and I have a lot of problems because my color, my skin color. But at the same time, certain races that are considered as have privileges, if you really take each individual and if you talk to them, only then you will learn that they are also disadvantaged. They are also marginalized in many ways. And sometimes let's talk about men. And it breaks my heart how especially men are so marginalized. General majority of the world are chasing the feminine, chasing the trans movement, chasing LGBTQA movement, but there is no movement for men, for an example. And I think it's so abstract, it's so alien to us. But you have no idea how many men are struggling so much, unable to express their feelings, unable to process their feelings, don't know how to talk to their children because they have not received love. Like my father is a great example, being the youngest of the family, not being able to express himself, you share his words. I remember in I remember my dad has really never really called me by my name, never really called me son as such. If he saw me, he would say something to me directly. And my intention here is to share this message with you. If you have a father like that, them, they need the love the most. And if you are someone who is finding yourself stuck and not know how to really go out there and express your emotion, we have forgotten part of who we are as human beings. We have forgotten part of the beauty of being on this planet. Very often, life tends to be very hard and it takes a long, it feels like it's a long time. But I think the human life, in comparison to the existence itself, is very, very short. And I think we are not here, really, we are not here to limit ourselves so much. We are not here to struggle so much. And the reason why we are having this conversation is to flourish from those struggles, leave them behind, and our generations to come, help them heal and create a healed earth. And I strongly believe it's very much possible. There are going to be trauma, there are going to be difficulties always. Like for an example, last week we looked at certain trauma, like we look at the maternal trauma, for an example. We are born with a pain. The mother goes through so much pain while they give birth to a child. When that happens, it teaches us that trauma is required for us to learn how to survive, learn how to operate in this space. But it doesn't necessarily define who we are. It shouldn't define the rest of our lives. And we all become healers. We all hold space for those mothers. We all pass those children from hand to hand, hug to hug, so that we can heal together. I think it's very important. So the interesting thing about trauma is that when trauma shows up at a later stage in life, that it shows up unconsciously, that we are not really aware that we are behaving based on how that clayman is modeled. Some parts are crooked, some parts are broken. And unfortunately, mental emotional trauma doesn't become visible until the trigger is present in the environment. Recently, one of my senior a colleague who used to come for executive coaching for a very long time. And then they changed the organization, so we didn't work together. And very recently, this person reached out to me and started working again with me. And this person told me that They always thought that they had the best upbringing. They went to elite school. They had elite upbringing. They had all comforts growing up. So they never thought about trauma. Up until recently, when he stood up in a large meeting, when he had to speak, an anxiety attack came over him. He became almost paralyzed. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't say anything. And it re-traumatized him. It re-traumatized him. The reason being that it was a reality that he did not know was possible. He never identified himself with anxiety to begin with. So when the right trigger is present in our environment, we end up experiencing realities that could become very challenging for us. And I think that's why your work as a professional coach or as a therapist or a healer are absolutely crucial, because you enable, before that happens, before such challenging life experiences to overcome, you enable people to recognize. And I think this is why trauma informed coaching is so very important, because individuals, professionals feels comfortable to sought after professional coaches sometimes than psychotherapists or clinical psychologists. The reason being stigma sometimes. Therefore, our work need to be trauma informed. It's very important because we can really help our clients, our family, ourselves before things happen to us, take control over them, recognize who we are, and look deep within ourselves. And I think that is one of the things that we should be doing as we go to school, as we grow up, as we do extracurricular activities. I believe strongly every school must have several trauma informed coaches, not just one counselor or two counselors. We must have equal number of teachers. We need to have people, those who can hold space and support. And that's what we are. That's my agenda. In this world, as we continue to grow and develop in the next few generations, if our schools, as AI is going to take the roles of the teachers, what if we could train all teachers to become healers? What if you could train all the teachers to become um, trauma informed professional coaches, so that they can continue to provide loving care to our children, so that the generations to come could change? So, if there's any way that you can make a change, if you need my help, reach out to my team. We are here. We are happy to talk to policymakers, large organizations. I think the United Nations need to hear this message. I think UNICEF needs to hear this message. I think WHO knows this message, and we need to support all these large organizations so that we can make a larger change. So if you're part of any of those organizations, reach out to us. Let's work together. Let's create, let's be the agents of change right then and there. Right, so we discussed about some few trauma responses. As this conversation evolves, I'm going to invite you to a little bit of a deep exploration of what trauma responses are. But for now, you remember some of the trauma responses. And then we also started discussing from the very beginning that although when we use the word trauma, or when we talk about triggers, when we talk about trauma responses, very often we look at it from a painful perspective. And often we look at it from a, if I may say, like negative perspective. Negative is a construct, as I always say. In my world, negativity doesn't exist. Just a perception of how I perceive something exists. And we could use a label to call it negative sometimes. Negative, positive, they are all perceptions. But nevertheless, for simple terms, we think that trauma is a negative thing or painful thing or something that we should be afraid of. While there is certain truth to it because it's painful, we also understand just by looking at the Holocaust survivors' children, you have come to learn that they have a longer triggered response. They remain triggered biologically, not just mentally, emotionally, biologically. Certain gene expression is such that they remain vigilant to their environment. During that time of vigilance, their heart may be pumping. During that time, their arms may be sweating. Their motor control may be calibrated as if they want to escape from something that there is nothing to escape. It's truly because
Yeah.
the genetic information, the Our epigenetics, if not universal intelligence that is inside of us, decided to enable that vigilance in the next generation, because they can be a little bit safer in case if something like Holocaust would happen again. That's the interesting thing. Now, our nervous system doesn't understand the literally what is happening in the environment. Like I said earlier, maybe our love language is criticism. However, our nervous system doesn't process it in that way, because criticism and processing, understanding that love, it's my mom's love language, is a cognitive process. But what happens to our nervous system only carries partial, small amount of cognitive processes. It has more. The nervous system gets conditioned in a physiological way, and that's what we call trauma imprinting. We just touched base on that during our last session. Today I was supposed to discuss about that, but I thought looking at the bigger picture is important. Otherwise, we lose the meaning in why we are doing this, and that's the reason why I'm taking a little bit of time and debriefing everything that we already know. And that's what I meant by integration. Very often we are conditioned, we live in a world where we follow rules, where we follow the structure, the SOP, or just the conditioning that we have inherited. But it's important we stop, take a step back, and integrate what we are learning here. So let's look at the bigger picture. I don't believe trauma is a bad thing. I rather believe trauma is absolutely important. Trauma is what enables us to survive. So at the end of this conversation, I invite us to think about why we survive then. What are we then really doing? What is the purpose of being here? What is the meaning of being here? The biggest question. I strongly believe that based on my findings, based on my experiences, based on my research, based on my meditation, based on my altered states of consciousness, I know why we are here. And it's a much simpler, it's so much more simple than very often what we think, how we complicate it. I think it's a very simple truth, which I would like to call enlightenment. I think one could easily challenge me on that subject, and it's understandable. And it's all right because we all have different understandings. But for me, in my reality, enlightenment is very simple, and it's almost sitting here, but the nose has become, for an example, our eyes don't see our nose. It's almost ignored by our unconscious mind because it's just so obvious. But actually, if you really pay attention, if you do this, do it with me, you really can see your nose. But when you open your eyes, you don't see the nose. It's because it's so obvious. And I believe certain deeper spiritual truths are not necessarily rocket science or too mystical or too supernatural. They are just right in front of you. Unfortunately, we are distracted, so we just don't simply see the deepest truths about ourselves. So today, in this model that I'm talking about, the trauma evolution model, I am going to discuss with you what I believe is simple enlightenment, or in other words, what are we here for? What are we doing in this space? All right, so moving on, we looked at different types of disorders. It's also important we understand certain words that we have categorized. We have told that this is this disorder, this is that disorder. Having some understanding is important, especially when we work with our clients. We need to have a structure. It's true that things are fluid. It's true that um, many things might have a deeper reason why we are experiencing a specific way. But while we very often notice that traditional mental clinical care is limited in many ways, having a structure is also very important. So therefore, we look at acute stress disorder, we looked at post-traumatic stress disorder, and also we looked at complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And we also recognize that the responses after something happened to us, how we react to it is different from person to person. It's different from the severity as well. So we have an adaptive zone where it is temporary, and then it would be a temporary sleep disturbance or temporary anxiety, all the way to impairedness, where we can't engage in our day-to-day things that we do. We can't engage in our work or our studies actively. Now, that can be an extreme condition where very often could go under the diagnosed area. And then also there is the subclinical response where we can just function while we are experiencing. And in my understanding, in my opinion, I strongly believe that many of us are operating in this subclinical trauma response, which very often, for some certain cases, because of the, how do I say this politically correctly? So you go to a clinical psychologist, and the clinical psychologist could only very often undertake a case, especially if the client is supported by a insurance, if the client is diagnosed. Only if the client is diagnosed. I think these are different in different places of the world, but majority of we understand that once the diagnosis is made, that's the only time a client could receive, a patient could receive the insurance care so that they can continue to have a treatment plan. Very often, the temporary, the adaptive zone, unless it goes under ASD, or very often this high functioning status, if not subclinical state, is where most people are. And if you may notice now that we are talking about larger spiritual realities, now there is this very big um, um, what word do I use? Big um, discussion around this UFO APA files being released by the US government. And many people are asking why we are not visited, or why aliens are not talking to us, and that kind of questions, right? So that's a lot. So I have this humorous thought to myself. I think if there was an alien race, which I believe already they are aware of us very much, and now there's that actual evidence coming out. And I strongly believe that I strongly think, how would they go back and report about Earth? They probably say that this planet, whatever that we would call it, right? Earth is absolutely magnificent planet. It's full of resources, absolutely beautiful. And they would say the inhabitants of this Earth are absolutely exceptionally lucky to have such a beautiful planet. If you're someone who is traveling, very often we forget this. If you are living in our little village, if you are living in conflict zones, if you are living in our own house where there is so much conflict, we forget that we live in a beautiful blue magnificent planet. If you're someone who is traveling, if you're someone who is going beyond the comfort zone, you learn that this planet is absolutely magnificent. And so aliens would say that, I believe. And at the same time, they would say there are some beings that they are really experiencing this planet to their best ability. And probably they are talking about insects, the butterflies, the fireflies, the lions, and the elephants, and all the other species. And then they're probably saying, unfortunately, there is a specific species that seems uh, that think that they are very advanced, and that species think that they are very knowledgeable and superior to everyone else, is unfortunately harming the environment and harming the other species. Now, this is nothing new. This already knew. This already you knew. But lastly, I'm pretty sure they're saying, unfortunately, that specific species is so badly traumatized. They're traumatized by their own actions, the way how they chase resources, the way how they overuse resources, the way how they inflict pain on each other. Really, if you come to think of it, no species do that. Other species, and we think that we are the most advanced species on planet. Yet, the trauma that is out there for our survival, so our consciousness can continue, that we can experience this beautiful blue planet, we can experience this marvelous universe that we live in. Instead of doing that, we end up hurting each other. We end up really hurting each other. We do understand that there are some people who are born with neurological conditions. For an example, when we talk about psychopaths, we know that some of their brain chemistry, some of their brain structure is hardwired to really hurt other people. And that is true. But at the same time, majority of us are not like that. That's just a minority, and it's the way it is. We know that trauma is required. So there are a set of people like that. What if you all came and we were able to not put them in a small little cell and control them in a way that it harmed them further? Rather, what if we were able to recognize those people and create an environment for them to also thrive in some way? And at the same time, what if we were all able to heal so that the aliens might as well reach out to us and say that you're healed, you see the bigger picture? I think like that. I strongly believe when aliens go back, they say to their whatever, wherever they're reporting that the human race is majority of the human race is unfortunately unwell. And I think many of us are falling in that subclinical trauma response area, that we are functioning, we are barely functioning, but there's so many challenges that we are day to day dealing with. Rather than really having this freedom and say that I am really on a journey of healing. I'm healing every day, every single day, and I am contributing to a healed earth. I hope I'm not getting too far-fetched here, but I think from my perspective, that's the point we're doing this. So I introduced you our CTICC framework, and you know that is very highly aligned with ICF. And there are 8 competencies, key competencies, and then there's one last foundational knowledge of trauma and trauma-related disorders. So that's actually somewhat we are exploring here in this space while connecting with some of the other competencies. All right. So if you notice, this session and the last session focuses on competency number 4, and particularly 4.5, trauma-informed psychoeducation. So right now, coaching is really big on focusing on client at that moment, working with the client, leading their own way. That's important, absolutely. Provided, consider that they're healthy individuals, that trauma is not overshadowing their current life and then their future. But in order for us to create a much deeper possibility of expansion and healing, it's important that they learn about themselves. Sometimes when I work with clients, you're not going to do psychoeducation within coach specific frameworks, especially traditional frameworks. It's important that we maintain boundaries. But when you work as a trauma integration coach, not even informed coach, it's really important that you help clients interpret and understand what is happening in them. And very often I find when I or operating the role of the psychotherapist, when we create the opportunities for psychoeducation, very often my clients, patients tell me that just learning why this is happening to me, understanding why my heart has palpitation, understanding why it's difficult for me to breathe, understanding why I go into panic attacks, understanding why I am avoidant in relationships, understanding why I feel so disorganized when someone is romantically interested in me, already helped me to a great deal, Fernando. That's 50% my healing. Now it's easy for me to continue. So that's what we are doing here a little bit, creating psychoeducation so we become aware. And then, if you recall, we looked at from the bigger picture when it comes to um, um, stressor-related conditions or disorders. Usually, there are 3 main areas: stress, adversity, and trauma. We have discussed this, and today we will look at it one more time, right? So we are looking at how unconscious whispers from the past quietly hold us back from our fullest life. That's our subtopic today. And last week I introduced you this little clay man, right? How did you come to be who you are? Your sense of self. Very often, perhaps for many of you, up until you thought that you are fully who your sense of self is, you may not have noticed that you are a borrowed reality. You are an implied reality in many ways. You borrowed things from your grandmother. You borrowed things from your great grandmother. You borrowed things from your uncles. You get great uncles, great uncles. You borrowed things. And then people implied things on you. People sometimes said things to you that hurt you. And then you operated from that place of hurt and so on. So we continue on. If you recall, we discussed some comprehensive classifications of trauma, and we looked at some examples in our last session. And these are the classifications: nature of exposure pattern, relational attachment context, the developmental timing, social, collective, and environmental scope, event or content type. And then also there are some other special classifications which do not go under any of these. And this is, in this context, is comprehensive. But if you, when we do a PhD on trauma, this expands greatly. And this conversation at the end of the day is sense of self-focused, because what trauma really does to us, very often we thought it's just that panic attack we need to pay attention to. It's just that I'm afraid of that specific thing, or I have an allergy to that specific food, or I'm afraid of doing this, or I'm limited to this specific thing. That's what we thought the trauma responses were. But what we are trying to do here in this bigger, looking at the bigger picture, is understanding that the experiences, I'm not just only saying trauma, everything, the things that you celebrated, things that you experienced as pleasure, as well as pain and difficulties, have formed your sense of self. So this is a borrowed sense of self. This is an implied sense of self. And very often, colleagues, you as professional coaches, psychotherapists, um, do you have the same experience yourself? Sorry, my AC is a little bit too cold. I just changed it a little bit. Have you ever experienced when you do deep work with your clients? I find it so fascinating. As you're aware, I have worked with royals. I work with politicians. I work with top level of cultural, multicultural organizations, leaders in those organizations. Even sometimes an owner of a multi-billion-dollar business had told me that they feel like a fraud. I have worked with school teachers who have told me that they feel like a fraud. I just had a client today, this afternoon, and this client has a business well established. When this specific client speak about his financial capacity, he speaks in millions of dollars. Yet he told me just today that he feels like a fraud. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt like a fraud? You have all the qualifications. You have all the training that's necessary for your work. You have you can invest in things. You can have everything that you want to have. Some of you, some of us. Yet, some of us still feel like we are a fraud. Why is that? It's because what I'm talking about is one of the commonest at some point. Almost all my clients, I'm taking this seriously. I'm not just saying it to sensationalize it. Almost all my clients at some point in their therapeutic or coaching journey told me that they feel like fraud. I think I no longer have to explain to you why we feel like a fraud. Because somewhere down the burrowing implications, traumatized, making ourselves small, covering ourselves with masks, we forgot who we were. We forgot the true essence of who we were. Therefore, when the greatest scholar or the greatest businessman or a mother with 5 children, when they say that I feel like a fraud, I understand them. I no longer feel like a fraud, but I used to, big time, feel like a fraud with all my credentials, with all my qualifications, with all the recognition I already have. I used to feel like a fraud. But once you decide for yourself, why do I feel like a fraud? Where do I need to do the work to feel like that I'm fully authentic? Then it becomes, and I think it's not just my authentic self is telling my truth, or my authentic self is dressing up in a specific way, or my authentic self is speaking in a specific way is what truly authentic self is. Your authentic self starts to emerge when you recognize that you're that clay man that has gone from hand to hand. And for us, for some of us, it may be hand to hand. But for some of us, it may be under the bus. Sometimes it may be under the hands of the rapist. Sometimes it may be under falling off a cliff. Sometimes we have been scrutinized by, for some of us, it may be our ancestors who were in war, who lost their land, who were forced into, who were forced into slavery, who were forced into prostitution. Therefore, we feel like a fraud because no one was born thinking, I want to be forced into prostitution. I want to be forced into be raped. I want to be forced into slavery. No one. But someone down the line in our ancestral line, they were enslaved. They were raped. They fell off a cliff. They fell under a bus. So we start creating our authentic self when we really not only look at our past, not only looking at what have we borrowed from our environment, from the people that we interact, also implied, but also what did my grandmother go through? Why did my grandfather committed suicide? Why my father was absent? Why my mother was chaotic? When we ask those questions, when we truly recognize places that hurt, not just only mentally, emotionally, places where our body hurts, it's that when you know. I'm going to share with you a deeply personal story. You know my story, I have been telling you this. So, when my grandfather committed suicide, as my family ended up in destitution, my mother and four other siblings with my grandmom, with very little resources, if not almost no resources to survive. My grandmom quite literally tied all five children inside that little hut that they lived in into one of the poles that hut was hanging there, tied, including my mother. All five siblings were tied with a rope into that pole because she was so afraid that they would go out and do something, get hurt. Well, nevertheless, they escaped, they got hurt. They did get hurt several times. And my mom, this happened when she was 5 years old. So her legs didn't develop well, frankly speaking. Her legs didn't develop well. And even at the moment, struggling with one of her legs. When she walks, she falls down very often.
What's in your
My
backpack?
heart goes to her. Absolutely heart goes to her.
How you do that? I don't know. Where is it?
All right. So my mom uh, couldn't develop her legs. One of her legs is really thin, and also she worked very hard to take care of me and my sister. As a she had me when she was 21 years old, and the rest of the life she really struggled so much to bring me and my sister up. So she really worked hard, and she had very little understanding about why her leg was hurting, and she had more pressing issues to pay attention to than her leg. And when she had me and my sister, and when my father went out to uh, went out to provide for the family, we used to, I don't remember, but my mom says we used to live in a very small one room, just one room, and there was a little space that we could go out into the little bit of outside area. So one day I have gone out and then I have plucked a flower from a tree that's outside. And the neighbor was very angry about this. And the neighbor screamed at my mother and me, which I don't remember. So My mother, from that days, she bottled up so much. I mean, from childhood, she bottled up so much fear. My mom is very scared. Now she has found her freedom. Now she's a faith healer. Now she helps hundreds of people. She helps more people than me in a week, frankly speaking, as a faith healer. And now she has gained the courage. Now she is not afraid of things. But growing up, she bottled up so much fear that she was so afraid, like my grandmother, of losing me, harm coming to us. So what did she do? She locked me and my sister inside that little room. And few years ago, I was in Vietnam with few of my friends. This is the time, several years ago, not few years ago, this is the time I was going through my very deep healing journey and healing myself. I was I was out and about with friends, and we were in a beach city in Vietnam, and I was wearing a shorts. I was wearing shorts. And one of the friends, or friend of a friend, uh was speaking in a different language which I understood a little bit, was talking behind my back saying that I have legs like toothpicks, that I have legs like toothpicks, and they were laughing at me. I knew this. I knew this about me. I knew this about me. And I also knew where it came from. As a child, I didn't have the opportunity to really develop muscles. Imagine that, colleagues. I couldn't really freely run around because I grew up in poverty, and I'm not afraid or ashamed to say this. So it took me many years from that moment. I could have gotten angry, I could have gotten upset, but I sat there. I remember I was sitting by the beach, sitting, and really tears were coming down. Remembering as a child how, or not remembering, frankly speaking, these things I know based on what my mom said, what she said. So much fear being inflicted in us, myself, and my sister as children. And we unfortunately didn't have the opportunity to really freely run in the environment. I think this is while I was really the initial stages of growing up. Afterwards, my father, my mom, they worked very hard. We were able to move into our own place with a little land, some trees that we could run around and play. But there was a time in my life that I was so constricted in such a way that my environment was such that I couldn't grow the right muscles in my legs. And I have been on a journey past years, dancing, working out in a way that I can regain the muscle and re-strengthen my legs. Because I know I'm 41 years old at the moment, and I know in a few years I will go in the same direction as my mom if I did not strengthen my legs. So really seeing the parts that hurt you, it can be the stomach that is not able to uh, contain you. It may be that heart that gets fired up quickly. It may be the hands that start to shake. It may be your mind that becomes really puzzled when you're in a specific situation. Or it may be your legs that are weak. When you really pay attention to where it hurts, where it is weak, then you're starting to recognize that you have borrowed pain, you have borrowed certain limitations. And today, I have nothing but kindness for that neighbor. I wonder, why was that neighbor so angry for a little boy, perhaps 4 years old, perhaps 5 years old, little boy plucking a flower that just came out of nature? Why were you so angry? And I strongly believe there's part of that person that hurt so badly. That person hurt so badly, couldn't see a little child fascinated by nature. So this conversation is not just about a trauma-informed coaching competency framework. This conversation is about life. This conversation about liberation, freedom, most importantly, love and kindness. Because now you know that these borrowed realities, the body is not really yours. You borrowed your body. Your consciousness borrowed your body in order for us to experience time, in order us to experience consciousness. And emotions are required for us to safeguard. Emotions are required for us to know pain so that we can experience love. Like those, excuse me, little insects that are which are attracted to the fire or the light. How we are so attracted to love. Very often we say love and light. We aspire for love. We only can aspire for love if we knew the pain. If there was no pain, if there was only love, then we wouldn't value love. Therefore, the emotions are very important. And all of these things came together as identity and association. So very often when we say who we are, we just talking about a borrowed identity. And we associate ourselves with things, people. And that's why there is right now big celebrity culture. That's why there's influencers are making millions and millions because there's a disconnect. Very many of us, I see that love and worship celebrities, love and worship influencers. Yet we don't love ourselves. We don't love our immediate family to begin with. It's because sometimes we are coping with all this inner rejection, this inner conflict, inner borrowedness, feeling like we are fraud. So when we attach ourselves with someone who is recognized, we feel like that gives us some sense of self, sad reality. I think if you are around my generation, you'll be able to see this better than, unfortunately, the current generations, the recent generations, and the generations to come. And that's why, as wisdom keepers, wisdom sharers, we all need to share this message. So we started talking about trauma imprinting. We talk about neurobiology stage, we talk about nervous system, we talk about spiritual and existential imprints, we talk about relational imprints, we talk about attachment imprints, and I look forward to going deeper into trauma imprinting in our next session. So as I promised today, as you are looking at the bigger picture, I would really like us to look at the trauma evolution model one more time. And that was a request from you. Many of you mentioned in the feedback you would like to learn more about it. This is the clayman I was talking about all this while. So let's start where the stressor related experiences come from. Now, I'm not talking about this triangle just with you. I'm talking about this triangle you as a generational being. To me, we are like hand holding. I hold my mother held my hand, my grandmother held my mom's hand, great grandmother, great great grandmother, and so on. Unbreakable chain. There is no one here who could say, oh, I don't have a great grandmother. I didn't have a great grandfather. I'm not, I don't belong to a generation. Impossible. Then you cannot be here. Imagine the stress all those people experience, the adversities they experience, the trauma that they experienced. You may not have been enslaved. Touch wood, you may not have been assaulted, and it remains that way. Touch wood. But someone in your generation had this intense, overwhelming experience. So we are not entitled to say that, oh, I've never experienced trauma. That's very ignorant to say that because your ancestors lived through you. So there's a stress that we have experienced that was overwhelming. Adversity in such a way that you may have been poured with love. You may have had all the 5 layers of Maslow's pyramid fulfilled, all the layers fulfilled. But down the generational line, there are ancestors who were not able to receive all that care. And those generations are living through you. You are a living trophy, a replica, if not a moving lifeline of your ancestors. So we all have had stressor-related experiences. It's not a matter of whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not. It's a matter of that we have had stressor-related experiences, even through our ancestors, if not us. So we begin there. We understand that's where the imprinting began. And comes the next layer. This imprinted information, this information gets imprinted in our body, literally in our body. Now, in our next session, I'll talk about how our body, certain tissues can host traumatic memories. So this is part of my research. Therefore, I try to remain as much scientifically measurable as possible. So I have only included these 3 areas: mental, emotional, physiological. But I also strongly believe there's a divine part of us. There's an energetic part of us. For an example, you're all aware that I work with psychedelics. I work with myself. I also work with my clients. And I strongly believe, I think someone must say this beyond the clinical aspects, beyond the scientific aspects. My experience is that when I explore about these deep states, altered states of consciousness, very often I explain it scientifically. I say that what happens in your body, what molecule is interacting with what part of your what kind of neurochemical receptor, and what does that mean? What happens in your neuro? I can talk about it all day. And that's what I do most of the time, especially when I teach this subject or when I do a lecture somewhere or when I write a paper. But deep down, I know beyond these chemicals, beyond these connections, we are somehow energetic. There's some divine, for a lack of a better word, there's some universal intelligence that is more magnificent than us. And that energy that comes through us during those experiences. So forgive me for not including that part, the spiritual component, the mental, emotional. Potentially we can say it's combination of these 3 is what spiritual is. It's not separated. Therefore, it's a encompassing understanding of mental, emotional, and physiological components is what creates a spiritual component. Looks, if you are here, please share the link for our those colleagues who would like to receive the certification, right? So mental, certain challenges that we have mentally, like in some ways can't put ourselves out there. We can't rise up to the challenge of wanting to establish ourselves, our practice, our dreams. As simple as sometimes can reach out to the person that we are madly in love with. Simple. perhaps establishing a business, perhaps taking that next step, whatever that dream you have. Ask yourself, what is stopping me? Most of us have those dreams and emotions. Sometimes it feels like the heart is in our mouth when something is going on. Something very simple. This customer care person is not able to answer our question and we lose it. Emotional, physiological. As we grow older, we start to look older sooner. Our body is restricted, we can't move. We usually call it office syndrome, we usually call it back pain, and we come to terms with it. Physiological imprinting happens. And the next layer, effect of the experience, impairment. I have been talking a lot about impairment so far, but trauma is not just about impairment. Now, for an example, when those survivors, children of the survivors of Holocaust, developed a longer alert, vigilant period, it looks like impairment. Impairment is easy to understand when we talk about trauma. But on the other hand side, it's actually strength. It's really the growth. Why am I passionate about this subject? Why am I deeply discussing this topic? Why I want to support everyone's growth? It's simply because there had been strength. It has developed strength. So in a way, I'm grateful for that neighbor. Because if I had healthy legs, if my friend didn't laugh at me, I may have never thought about trauma in that way. If my mom was not severely assaulted several times growing up, if she did not have severe mental conditions that put me and my sister under almost, what do you call that, mending sword under the fire, I might not be talking to you right now. So I see my place. I recognize my purpose. And I'm deeply grateful. I'm so sad and I'm so sorry for my mom. Yet I'm so grateful that she endured those experiences. Because right now, I'm not afraid of crying in front of you. I'm not afraid of sharing this message in the most human way. And it requires a lot of courage. It requires a lot of strength. And that's strength, that's growth, that's post-traumatic growth. I may be talking a lot about the problematic side of trauma right now, but let's not forget that cat, the jungle cat, who has that muscle reflex, that's type of growth, that's type of strength the cat has accumulated. The one of the first examples we discussed, I think I have a picture here, this one. Yeah, this is strength. So therefore, impairment is not the only side of trauma. So your ancestors endured a lot of difficulties and challenges in order to pass on strength, in order to help you grow, in order for you to find out your purpose, your place, and meaning in this beautiful experience that we are having. And then apart from impairment and strength, there's also an area which we call adaptive stabilization, which we mean is that we are able to, our system is able to adapt quickly. It's almost like very little impact that created. And that's why we see someone being in an accident. One person is immobile, cannot move. They have amnesia. They don't remember what happened. And on the other hand side, someone who just sat next to them just walk away as if nothing happened. That is adaptive stabilization. So when we talk about adversity, stress, and challenge, it's sometimes impairment, sometimes strength and growth, and sometimes adaptive stabilization. And often it's a combination of all. The next layer, the trauma-informed care. That's where when we start to begin to heal. And this comes from many layers. The first layer is our capacity to cope up. Are we able? Do we have the cognitive capacity? Do we have the emotional capacity? Do we have the means to learn, reach out to practitioners? Capacity, in many ways, capacity. You do, and that's why you are here. You have the absolute capacity. And I believe some people joined this call at the beginning. I mean, at the very, very beginning, not today. And some of them are not showing up anymore. Perhaps they do not have the capacity to hear this message. Maybe it is too triggering for them. And I completely understand. I have no expectation for them to be here because they simply don't have capacity. So we also should not have an expectation that everyone should be able to heal. Everyone possibly can heal to a certain extent, but it requires capacity. It requires energy. It requires large amount of energy to, the energy is a type of capacity. And then often it requires support. It requires support from someone who might look at you and say, I see you, I recognize you, I see that you are suffering too. Working with a psychotherapist, a healer, or with you as a coach. And then on the other hand side, when the capacity and the support meets, the meaning is made. If I told you this story of my mother, my grandmother, myself, perhaps if I just only told you one side of the story about my mother, you might think, what a vicious woman, hurting children. No, she wasn't. That was her reality. Now you understand that. Why? Because we made meaning. We understand now how it came to be. Therefore, the process of meaning making is absolutely important. The meaning making cognitively, meaning making emotionally, meaning making physiologically, meaning making spiritually, absolutely important. And that is trauma-informed care. Like for an example, when a client tells you from a coaching competency framework, when a client tells you, for the very first time, I understood that I have never been supported emotionally growing up as a child. The amount of pain, amount of depth in something like that is reverent, colleagues. Unless you have experienced it, you might not know how that feels. Even if you have experienced it, you might not know how that feels. So the trauma-informed care is something that you need to engage in such reverence. I have no other word. Such reverence. It needs to be your spiritual practice. Honestly speaking, I'm not just limited to clinical stuff. I'm not limited to ICF competency framework. They are limiting because they need to have a standard. But I'm not afraid of telling my truth. It's a reverent place to be. For me, it's a spiritual place to be, to hold space for people. I think perhaps because I know the pain. And the next, integration and transformation, creates growth and expansion. And I know if you're attending these sessions, or even if you're attending one session, you experience growth and expansion. You have no choice. If you're already making meaning with what we just looked at earlier, if you feel like there's support, even in this space, I'm delivering this complimentary series the way that I can support you, the way I can help you make meaning. So I believe that there is growth and expansion in you. And I feel like I have done my work. And one of the most important things to remember is that the identity reorganization, going from feeling like a fraud to embodied self, embodied becoming who you are really, who truly are your expression, full expression, or the maximum potential expression. Earlier, I told you that I will tell you what the real journey that we are here. I think when the consciousness landed in your in on this planet to experience this universe, the purpose was to find yourself. Purpose was to create your own self-expression, a unique expression beyond the voices, beyond the borrowed realities of your ancestors, and then to experience this universe. And very often people say, my purpose is to be, being. What is being? There is no being if you are feeling like a fraud. There is no being. There is no helping people. There is no helping the world. There is no healing the world if you are not healed. How old are you? Are you 20 years old? 40 years old? 50 years old? 60 years old? You are on that journey of knowingly or unknowingly finding yourself. And when you find your authentic self, when you come closer to your authentic self, you have the freedom to decide what this being means. Being present to that moment, being present to what you're doing, how you're doing, being aware, just fully aware of what you're doing, why you're doing, rather than being driven by forces that are not ours. I believe that's what we are really doing. To experience, to express, to love, to dance, to endure the pain, to support each other, all that. Coming from not lack. I feel like I'm a fraud, I'm lacking. So let me be a coach and try to help other people. Well, through that process, you're finding yourself. Yet again, if you are able to first heal yourself, if you could help yourself before you help others, I think you're finding your way through. I think that's what we are here for. The simple truth that is right here, that we are not noticing, experiencing. Right now, we can't experience our universe. We can't experience our world because we are overwhelmed. We are overtaken by the past, the implied, the borrowed realities. Therefore comes this last expanded embodiment. When you learn, when your capacity grows, when you find who you are truly, or when you create who you are, maybe perhaps there's nothing to find, there's nothing real to be found, there's potentially to be created. And when you create that, you create this inner expansion, feeling whole. You can't be, you can't help, you can't support, you can't heal others if there is no embodied inner expansion. It needs to come from a place of wholeness. You're always on the journey, little bit deceived at every step of the way, unless we are willing to create that embodied self, creating that inner expansion, finding embodiment, being able to find happiness, fulfillment when you are in the deepest pain. Accept the deepest pain when you are in the deepest pain and recognize, in my body, my neurochemicals are rushing, oozing right now because I'm hurt. And then when you are in love, deeply, madly in love, when you're going through an orgasm, being able to experience and say that right now my body is experiencing this beautiful, positive, if not pleasurable experience. And if you can accept both of that, you have created embodied expansion within yourself. Because it gives you, rather than running around and asking, what am I doing? Who am I? What is my purpose? When you expanded your reality, you find yourself within yourself. And this is providing answers to existential awareness. If you are still asking, what am I doing in this universe? That means we are looking outward. We first find the answer within ourselves. We create embodied awareness. When we are embodied inward, outward, we become aware that we are consciousness inheriting this body here to experience, here to be in such a way that we can embrace the pain and the pleasure both and bring ourselves to the middle path. And I think when we understand that, it's not about transcendence. For me, the transcending is not about being able to levitate, being able to control things with your mind, being able to convert something into something. Not that. It's truly, really being able to recognize who you are, really being able to sit to yourself with peace in an embodied self and surrender to truth, surrender to the limitation of this universe, and accept the fact that we don't know. What we can know is that I can become an embodied, grounded self. And when I'm embodied and when I'm grounded, I'm able to experience, I'm able to be consciousness. I'm able to just be consciousness without an attachment to pain or pleasure. It doesn't mean I'm in a state of anhedonia, which means I'm not interested in anything. That's not it. It's not about trying to tame your ego in a way that you don't like anything. It's not about giving up everything and walking into the forest unless that's what being means to you. It's truly about recognizing that, living a balanced experience, not hurting someone else anymore because you know what it feels like to be hurt, and being able to love. I believe that's what transcendence is. And sometimes it's just too simple. It's too simple for someone to accept because we have come to become conditioned that it's something that we can't access in this lifetime, or we need to have so many past lives, or we have to be under some kind of a supernatural power to experience, or we are waiting for someone to return from their grave to give our salvation. I don't think that's the case. If I'm hinting at a specific practice, specific religion, and if you feel uncomfortable, please forgive me. I'm just sharing what I believe in, what I feel like. Make it yours. Find your own answers. So with that, I believe we are coming to the end of this session today. All right, and I call this Hettiyadura trauma evolution model. And let's be grateful for all the ancestral challenges, celebrations, love that they had so that we have come to be who we are. We take that and we make it who we are, and we become who we are so that we really can create our sense of self. So the more we talk about this topic, you're starting to recognize how trauma informs love. I know that today you're walking away with loving yourself a little bit more, loving your children a little bit more, loving even the enemies, or hating less your enemies a little bit, because the more we understand who we are, what has happened to us, the more it informs love. And I think that's why you're attracted to be here. That's why you're here. So in our next session, I will be discussing with you how trauma imprinting happens. With that, I send you love and light. I will see you next month. Thank you, and bye for now, colleagues and friends.